Hello everyone, this is Dartt, and just yesterday there was a developer Q&A session with game director Ion Hazzikostas and community manager Josh Allen. There was a lot of information about how the upcoming stat squish will work, some class-related stuff, questions about catch-up mechanics, and legendaries. So let's jump right in. Right out of the gates, Ion makes a statement that he wants to avoid spec-specific questions. And what spec does he use as an example? Survival Hunter. Really? You don't say. To be fair, Ion isn't a class designer. He was until just recently in charge of designing raid content. Now he's in charge of the game as a whole, and he feels his time would be better spent talking about the bigger picture. Okay, noted. Let's move on. First question. Is the secondary stat squish not going to hurt specs that heavily rely on crit, for instance Fire Mage, or Mastery, for instance Arms Warrior, etc.? The answer from Ion is that it shouldn't. You might lose a couple of percentage points on crit or Mastery, but you'll be gaining it in your primary stat, which should more than make up for it. Overall, the goal is to shift the focus from secondary stats to item level when the decision comes up on what to equip. Secondary rebalancing and jewelry changes on PTR encourage stat stacking and getting the item with the right stats even more. The development philosophy at the start of Legion was to go ahead and give players the maximum amount of their secondary stats and begin scaling up primary stats with higher item levels. This worked well with visible armor, but jewelry has no primary stat, so there was a scaling issue there. If you received a helm that was 20 item levels above the one you were wearing, it should have 20% more stats. This was not the case with jewelry. If you received a ring that was 20 item levels above yours, it might only have 12% more stats. So what mattered was whether it had the most desirable secondary stat for your spec. So with the rebalance, you're still going to want your best secondary stats. That's not going to change, but you will lose out if you opt not to equip a higher item level piece in favor of keeping what you have. Okay, next question. What is being done to ensure tanks want item level upgrades since primary stat means far less to them? You may get less secondary stats, but you will be receiving more stamina and armor, which will be weighted more heavily. Okay. What is the reason for large mechanical changes that are slated for 7.1.5? As it stands, a lot of classes are going to feel drastic changes on the order of what they felt moving from Warlords of Draenor to Legion. Really, Ion feels that the changes aren't such that they'll affect any class's core rotation, resource pool, or gameplay. Mainly, the changes are aimed at helping some recently completely reimagined classes fit better into the game. In some cases, that's going to take some trial and error. Next question. Long-term plans for Warlocks. Numbers aren't terrible, but none of the specs feel fun to play. He gave a very long answer here. Basically, for Affliction, Soul Effigy can be awkward. For Demonology, Demonic Empowerment is frustrating. Too much ramp time, too much of a feeling of juggling. For both of those, they need to look for ways to improve the specs and introduce better flowing rotations. That's going to take some time, and the class designers want to address it during this expansion, but there were 36 specs and not all of them can be first. Also for Destro, the class designers would like to implement something for soul shards that resembles the granular Ember resource model with partial recharges for shards, but with them being spent as whole shards. That's going to take some UI support and some redesign, but that's something they want to address in a later patch. Can Havoc have a viable DPS build that does not use Fell Rush or Vengeful Retreat as rotational abilities? The answer here was yes. The developers want to introduce options that allow you to either use or not use those abilities depending on the situation. If using those will get you killed, then there should be an alternative. The Emerald Dreamcatcher nerf only helps lessen the pain between balance druids, but it also removes the possibility of balanced druids being competitive in single target. What are we gaining single target to make up for this nerf? The answer given was that if there was an item that was the decision point whether a spec was viable or not, then that item needed to be nerfed and the spec buffed as a whole. So that if you have the item, you lose nothing, but if you don't have the item, you will see a buff in being brought up to where the spec should have been in the first place. Moving on to the next question. Why is there not a single piece from Warrior Tier 19 set with Haste Mastery? It's the best 2 stats for Fury and Arms. There was actually a restatting pass made on the PTR, so there should be at least one item now with Haste Mastery. Also, the goal wasn't necessarily to make the ultimate items for any one class or spec. There will be 6-piece sets in Nighthold, so players will gain some freedom in how to achieve 4-piece bonuses. Unholy DKs rely heavily on the RNG and to some degree the right legendary to do competitive DPS. Current PTR changes do not seem to address these issues. Are there any plans to improve upon the system in Unholy? As far as the legendary goes, the same logic applies as with the Dreamcatcher for Druids. The randomness with Festering Wounds is something Blizzard is aware of. That randomness is there for some variability in the rotation sequence. What they may do is to cap Festering Wounds at 4 instead of 8, and instead spawn 2 ghouls instead for every rank above 4. Are there any plans for lowering the RNG of Roll the Bones? No. They're not going to lower the RNG on a class mechanic that revolves around rolling dice. The slice and dice talent the devs think seems lackluster, and they want to focus on improving that or offering a talent choice in that row. Why is Greater Blessing of Might a thing? This ability has been met with nearly universal disdain by Rets since its first appearance in Alpha. Ian says that Greater Blessings are a failed design. No one wants to look at meters and see that a paladin is taking credit for their DPS. At the same time, you don't want to be a paladin and think my DPS would be greater if this other person did a better job. Furthermore, they didn't want to create a situation where they were giving free damage and thus creating a situation where paladins would be picked to fill raid slots more than another melee class. There needs to be a better design, and given time, it will be scrapped and replaced. Moving on, those robust alternatives to Surrender to Madness that you said would come after 7.1. Not seeing them in 7.1.5 either. When? Clearly, reduced insanity drain during the first 18 seconds of Void form isn't going to help the low-skilled player. It does make regular Void forms more potent. Doing that reduces the relative benefit of Surrender in comparison to Surrender. They may need to tweak benefit curves of Surrender and normal Void forms. And this particular question caused the most epic stutter and stammer chain from Ian that I have seen to date. Obviously, Ian is not 100% comfortable on this topic. Any word on fixing the many issues with Storm, Earth, and Fire? Very frustrating when our main CD can be a DPS loss. There's a lot of mechanical issues that are holding the ability back. If they can't be fixed, then it'll be tweaked to help its numbers. Also, Serenity may need to be looked at. Can you once and for all remove Rune of Power? This ability has been a huge burden for the past 3 expansions, and it's still here and it's still mandatory for raiding. Ian would like to fix this via tuning, improving mirror images, for example. He doesn't feel that it should be the go-to talent no matter how high or low mobility the fight in question may be. It's a case of a situational talent becoming the highest viability talent. Is there a possibility for Holy Paladins to get more AoE heal over time spells? Single target based healing often feels clumsy, especially in raids. The answer is simply no. And he says, if you want more area of effect or heal over time spells, you should be playing either a Resto Druid or Mistweaver Monk. Strong single target heals are the signature of the Holy Paladin. The development team is happy with the healer balance as things stand. Marksman is seen as the top rating spec for hunters currently. Many hunters are unhappy with the vulnerable mechanic and with the immobility of the spec due to aim shot. Are you overall happy with how Marksman has turned out? Ian says mostly yes. Aim shot was meant to cost mobility at its very theme. It's a trade-off. Beastmaster is higher mobility, but Marksman has different capabilities, namely the amount of cleave effects. There is some tuning to be done to make people feel that both Beastmaster and Survival are more viable in different settings. Beyond that, no major concerns with Marksman currently. Do you have any plans to stop players from hoarding artifact power at level 35 till 7.2? The design that artifact weapons will use in 7.2 will not reward this. When you upgrade your artifact weapon in 7.2 and unlock the additional traits, your current final trait will be converted into the new traits. That may refund the artifact power you invested in it. All you would be doing by hoarding artifact power is denying yourself power in the short term. You'll be in exactly the same spot in 7.2. Moving on to the next question. Why haven't you made Artifact Knowledge account-wide? The developers wanted to make it an active process. The compendiums will help out quite a bit, helping your alts instantly move up in Artifact Knowledge ranks. The thought process is to reward you for actually playing your alts. Any plans for making more things account-wide? I like the way Artifact Research Compendium works, and it would be nice to have something like this for Reputation. This is already the case with the possible exception of Rank 3 Profession recipes, and the developers want you to have to invest time to earn that sort of economic power. They did not want to create a situation where alts were passively generating money for mains. In 7.1, we have 3 to 5 plus minute long loading screens, especially in Dalaran. When can we expect a fix? Blizzard is still trying to isolate the exact problem. It's a high priority issue, and although Ian didn't have any details to offer, as soon as they can fix it, they will. Okay. Let's see. Next question. What is your philosophy around legendary usability? Some legendaries require a specific situation to be useful at all, and therefore will often feel like they might not even be there in most situations. The idea is, as players gain more legendaries, to allow them to use them as a mix-and-match toolkit when faced with different situations and encounters. The problem comes from there being a pool of artifacts, with one or two being clearly the best in most circumstances, whether it affects your DPS, healing, or tanking. And that will affect the development team's ideas going forward. Why are you guys opting to introduce important quality of life boosts to class design via legendaries? For example, Beastmaster Shoulders. Developers want to see how they perform, and in the future this may turn into a baked-in effect to the class in question, or a 4-set bonus or whatever. They want you to be excited, and at the same time it gives them a way to learn about how it affects your class and spec. Any plan for a catch-up mechanic for the first 2 legendaries for alts? Over time, as more legendaries are added to the pool, the drop rates will be increased. That will serve as the catch-up mechanic. That's it for this Q&A and this summary. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. This is Dartt. Good luck. Have fun.